we've got here is a failure to communicate. Welcome back to another episode of Epsilon Reporting on Air. Hello, chilling here on a hot-ass summer day. What better to talk about than society? I'm joined here with another guy, and he has some thoughts about even the word society, or the use thereof, and then we'll get into the main meat and potatoes of this. So what were you saying about, like, the use of society or the lack of use?
Right, so the word itself, I made a very intentional plan to just remove that from my vocabulary entirely, because I noticed that nobody's ever told me a sentence that had society as the object of the sentence that I found even remotely insightful. Usually when people are saying society, they're saying something about like people are stupid, or like society's so fucked up because just whatever. I don't know. Nobody has ever just said anything about society that I thought was insightful at all. That's really all it is. I think it just doesn't sound intelligent. I think there are more articulate ways to say society. And I couldn't, not that I'm going to give you a synonym for it, but if you gave me a sentence where you're using the word society, I think maybe we could sort of boil it down and find a more articulate way of saying that.
Yeah. I think that there is some degree of at least the way society uses the word society. And there's like a degree of self-defeating perspective in the use of it, because it seems very isolating. It seems like you're talking about
us
everyone but you.
But you, yeah, and that's part of what makes it sound unintelligent to me, is you're like, everybody's this way, but I'm not.
Yeah. I call all episodes acts, actually. But, so, in that case, what I wanted to talk about today is how, and I was initially going to phrase it, how society seems to have a baseline, and how that baseline influences people's personalities, and how a lot of times almost any individual is objectively interesting, but the outward persona that they project is almost like a personality equivalent to pop music, where they have cherry-picked the attributes of their surroundings, their environment, and then also like some true elements of themselves to convey to the people around them in such a way that it is likely that everyone to an extent agrees with it, but that no one or few people love it. So kind of like how any other kind of genre, there's like die-hard fans that love it, but it is more polarizing where there are people that hate it. I think that people are projecting their personality in a way that's safe, where everyone's like, they're cool, but they're just passive individuals.
It's the difference between rap and like 70s soft rock. Like everybody can listen to 70s soft rock like in the background and just like have a decent time, but like rap is like you love it or hate it, kind of,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that being said, how would you preface the topic of today's talk without the use of society? And before we get into that, I think that part of the reason why you don't like using society is not necessarily because the word itself, but because of how people use it. It's kind of like something that's been used so often that it's kind of lost its meaning. Almost for me, that's like fascism. Whenever someone, like 90% of the time someone brings up fascism, it's not going to be an accurate critique of the way of organizing that government or anything like that. But a lot of times people conflate it with totalitarianism. So I guess let's start off with, let's define society as Wikipedia would define it.
Okay. Society is the aggregate of people living together in an ordered community. So sub-definitions there: the community of people living in a particular country or region, a specified section of a community, The aggregate of people who are fashionable, wealthy, influential, regarded as forming a distinct group in a community. Actually, I think that one's kind of useful.
That's like high society, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And the last one is the situation of being in the company of others.
That one's the loosest, most amorphous.
And I guess that's why I find the term to be unproductive, is because of how loose it is.
Yeah, I suppose that means it's almost, it's like squanch. Just like
Squanch.
Totally based in the context.
Exactly.
What if there was a movie called Breakfast Society? And just like we replaced everything. That one part kind of interested me, where it was saying like a part of a community. I almost would have thought that like my personal definition of society would have been larger than a community. But
yeah,
I guess it's all up in the air when it comes to society.
I think taking all of those definitions together, you could sort of define it as the sort of like the least common denominator or the greatest common denominator. Like it's the thing that sort of everyone has in common, right? We're all part of these different cultures and subcultures, but this is the stuff that everybody sort of knows about, if not, believes. Does that make sense?
For the purpose of I suppose. I also feel like in the purpose of this talk, there's a degree of kind of like cultural consciousness, because I feel like society that I'm trying to define or critique through this is the way it is because it's also been heavily commoditized. Like a lot of the factors leading into it have been heavily commoditized. So I guess in a weird way, I understand why you don't like the word, but then again, it's almost like almost no one can misuse the word.
Fair enough.
So, but yeah, for the purpose of this conversation, what I'm saying kind of, as you said earlier, the greatest common denominator between, as a result of a lot of these kind of layered on top of each other, I feel like there are negative effects on the vast majority of the individuals that I encounter. Kind of have to dance around it if you don't want to use that word, but all right, so are we, I guess now just the direction of the podcast, are we just here to say, yeah, that's a thing that people kind of seem to shift their personalities, what they decide to talk about based on the people that are around them, and I guess kind of how that leads into unauthentic or non-authentic living, or did you have like an actual more in-depth critique of that and kind of what goes into that?
I'm not going to criticize any individual for saying, for having certain beliefs. I'm not going to say that this is the greatest common denominator belief or personality or whatever. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but what I will say is that it's important to make sure that the things that you believe are yours, and that they're not just things that you believe because it's socially acceptable for you to believe them, and that you're doing it just to fit in. I mean, it is easy to take the thoughts of others who are popular and just claim them as your own.
Oh, no, I get what you're saying. Like, you don't want to criticize anyone for having any particular belief, which I do get, as long as it's not, like, incredibly destructive beliefs. But then again, for my own growth, I saw one of those memes that was like a whatever starter kit. And I think it was like a disgruntled youth starter kit.
That's a great example of this.
And that, like, I think when I saw that, like, some of it resonated with me. I'm like, holy shit, are certain aspects of my personality like a trope? And that kind of...
Wait, what was this? What was the starter pack that applied to you?
I think it was like disgruntled youth or something like that.
Okay.
I can't remember what was in it. I wish I saved it. But I was probably too pissed off that I just deleted it. But it definitely did make me reevaluate it. And exactly what you were saying. I was like, okay, am I doing this because I've seen other people that I look up to doing it? Is it blah, blah, blah? And actually kind of an overcorrection to that is a lot of my at least as it pertains to fashion, kind of fell towards utilitarianism. And so now I have clothes that have like a weird patch on it or something like that. And I'm not necessarily trying to make a statement with the weird patch. But for instance, I'm wearing a pair of pants right now that have like a military patch just because I had one around me. And I spilled some, I was helping my mom waterproof a shed. And I spilled some sealant on my pants. And sealant does not really come out of fabric.
You mean you can't wash it off?
Yeah. No, it was like...
No, yeah,
yeah,
that's
it was
the
stuck
joke.
in it,
Yeah.
I'll fucking kill you. Anyway, so I sewed a patch on it. And, I mean, it's sewed on in such a way that it's kind of like relatively fashionable. As an overcorrection, kind of got into utilitarianism, kind of reevaluated like ethics and stuff. So I feel like this is the tip of an iceberg on a much deeper conversation that we should focus on another podcast. I guess it's always important to understand when you digress. To get back to how individuals behave in kind of like larger group settings, I feel like, I don't mean to be like one of those people like, oh, everything's the corporation's faults or something like that. But I definitely could imagine how that ideology helps marketing. For instance, if an immense amount of people have a shared kind of common denominator belief and like behavior and way of looking at life and handling like just interactions that aren't incredibly intimate, they're also easier to sell. Like as a demographic, it like basically expands what demographic they fit into.
You know the those sort of like those nostalgia memes, like, you know, 90s kid stuff. Yeah. Okay. So the thing about that, I was wondering, like, how come we all have the same experience? Why does it seem like we all had the same childhood? And I was talking to somebody about that, and they said, because it's corporations. Like our childhoods were sort of manufactured because of advertising, and it's no coincidence that we all had the same toys, and that we had the same dads, you know, who wore cargo shorts and mowed their lawn. Like all of these, the stereotypes and our toys and everything are sold to us. And so, you know, at first I thought, like, man, maybe we are in a simulation. But then I realized, like, hey, we kind of are. And it's kind of manufactured by corporations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of the advertisement and also just the size of it. Like, for instance, how chain restaurants have gotten larger and more prolific. And TV shows, same thing, different networks offering the same TV shows. So that's very interesting that if as media gets more homogenous and like there are fewer players in the game, I wonder if those memes will hit even harder like this next generation. Like, oh, early 2000s kids will remember, and it's like the way you cut your sandwiches and the way you fold your clothes, like everything.
So just to touch on a few of these things that I've noticed, and again, I'm not making an agreement or anything one way or another. I'm just saying these are things that a lot of people, I think, believe but haven't really taken seriously because it's popular to believe them. One of these is that capitalism sucks. For one thing, capitalism, like, I don't think most people who claim that could really define capitalism.
It's like a weird state of them not being fully satisfied with their life, not seeing this, and then like capitalism is like a very powerful force, so they're like, that's the thing that sucks.
Yeah, it's less articulate, you know. There's also, everybody has a soul. Sort of like, oh, you know, when I die, my soul passes on to the next life or whatever. I mean, even though, I mean, that's pretty much just a cultural thing that's the only reason to believe this is cultural.
Oh, dude, I just thought of something. So we're sitting here talking about how a lot of these are like shared experiences, kind of like what we were saying about like 90s kids having a shared childhood because of corporations and like advertising, all that stuff. Just to recap, if you were not paying attention 2 minutes ago, but I just thought of, you could totally make another one of those things with religion, because I think everyone having a soul is like just what's the term, a holdfast, or the last vestige. Not even that, I'm just saying random shit now, but it's just like one of those things left over from the vast majority of people being religious. And so if you made something like, 1890s kids remember, or like 1790s kids remember, and then like have a bunch of religious iconography, that I'm gonna fucking like, as soon as this is done, I'm gonna go make that.
Do it.
But what other ones do you have?
Right, the last one is finding the one. That's I think the idea that there's one person for you. I mean, there could be, but that's generally like a pretty unexamined concept for those who use it.
Yeah, I heard of like a little like wives' tale thing, but basically it goes, there was a man that went his whole life without ever getting married, and no one really knew the reason why. They thought that maybe just like marriage wasn't for him, all that stuff. And so when he was on his deathbed, his family and the people around him gathered around, and they're like, hey, so why did you never marry anyone? Did you just never want to? Did you never look? Was it just not going to be fulfilling for you? And he was like, no, I absolutely looked. I looked my whole life, and I actually did find one person that I absolutely loved. And this was just so out of character for this like colder individual that everyone gathered around, and they're like, what? Like, tell me about it. What happened? Why? Like, what happened? And he's like, well, yeah, I searched everywhere. I found this one person, and they were the perfect wife for me. But the only issue was that they were looking for the perfect husband. And so,
wow.
Wow. Mic drop. But this mic is too expensive, so let's keep it right there. So basically, just to kind of round this off, I've always, it's kind of a weird thought, but I'm always like, what does like that person think of when they're taking a shit? Like, what do people think of in the moments in between? I guess the best way to counter a lot of these things where you can just easily be pigeonholed, make sure that you're not constantly distracting yourself with like social media or just movies or reading something like that. Just make sure on some level you do spend time talking to yourself. Like the moments in between, you're taking a shower, you're doing whatever, just really think about it, examine, kind of play that annoying why game with yourself, and just what you really love, what you really admire, start picking it apart. Just why do I like it? I think another great way to kind of counteract a lot of this is through travel. It's kind of a double-edged sword that the human brain can so easily accept that this is normality. I think it helps us deal and cope with a lot of stressful situations, but it also is like a major contributor to locking us into these kind of repeating loops and just kind of assuming that everything around us is normal, that this is the way it's supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. And we are just such a small part of the human element on this planet that it is 100% not true that this is all that there is. So when you travel, it quite literally gets you out of your echo chamber. It just kind of increases your surface area as an individual to how you can truly connect in a more meaningful and possibly less guaranteed safe interaction, but will most likely interact in a more fulfilling and deeper interaction. Well, I definitely got to say thanks to the other guy, and I enjoyed having someone else on the podcast. We definitely touched on a lot of other topics that I want to go into way more in depth on future podcasts. But as it stands, thanks for listening. This is Epsilon reporting. Good night.
And me. Bye.
And good luck.